So we're going to set up this catalog and talk about our preferences and our catalog settings. These are two things that kind of work together. So if I go over here where it says Lightroom, one thing I'm going to go is click on Preferences. And with Preferences, this tells me a little bit about how I want things to be written to the catalog. So let's start off with General. You can pick your language. When starting using this catalog, typically I'm going to say prompt me when starting Lightroom if I'm at a school computer all my time. That way it will remind me to look for my own as opposed to maybe pulling up somebody else's. So that's going to be kind of my starting point here. So import, this top one here, if you put in a memory card, it's going to try to pull it up and import it right away. So I like that right there. I like to select the current previous import collection during import. These other ones, I kind of agree with. Ignore camera generated folders. I don't like to treat JPEG files next to RAW files. Separate photos get really confusing, so I don't check that. And replace embedded previews with standard previews. I don't really deal with that so much either. And I'm not big on sound, so I leave those all out. Now, when I go to presets, here's probably the most important thing. It says location. Store presets with this catalog. And for class purposes, because our catalogs live on our portable hard drive with our image library, we want this to be checked. And it's going to be there together. Now, you can make default specific to camera serial number and ISO settings. That can be helpful for some things with presets. You can also make presets that kind of ignore this and work around this as well. So I don't tend to work with those right there, but if you have multiple cameras, this make default specific to camera serial number might work to your advantage. External editing. This is one that we'll spend a little bit more time on here because we have to kind of set this up so that we do the best we can working with Photoshop. So in general, the top one we want to leave alone because this is really important if you're working with, let's say, photo merges or you're working with HDR. However, I like to change the resolution to 300 to just be consistent with my other printing practices. But I like all these settings here. Now, additional external editor, we're going to do this one as well, but we're going to make some that are specific. So we need to think about in terms of what we want these to do. So I'm going to make one that's for edits in Photoshop. So I'm going to go down here where it says file format. I'm going to make that a PSD. So I'll do PSDs with layers. I'm going to do a color space. When I'm doing edits, I still work in ProPhoto RGB. So I'm going to do with that so I have my most color possible. My bit depth, I still do 16 bits while I'm doing edits. My resolution would be 300. So I'm going to have all that there. And then I'm going to do a custom preset. So here it is. An application. Sorry, I got to do this too. Application, choose. And I'm going to find my Adobe Photoshop. There it is. I'm going to go OK. And then I'm going to save current settings, a new preset. So I need to call this something that makes sense to me. So I'm going to go edit PSD. And then sometimes you might want to just stay there because you're going to do everything that way. But if you do multiple kind of settings, I could go Pro Photo 16-bit. Just so that I know, in general what I'm using this for. I'll click create. Now, there's one that I do that's a little different. I do that for print specific files. My print files I make TIFF, and then I reduce the Adobe RGB, or reduce the color space to Adobe RGB 1998 for our color settings, like so. This last one's a little bit controversial. Most of the time with the printers you're getting, you're not going to really gain a lot with the 16-bit component. So if you want to save yourself some grief in file size, you go down to 8-bit. But if you think you can gain some, you could do 16-bit. The world's changing, so you might be able to get more out of 16-bit in the future for printing purposes. It's kind of your choice. And I always leave the resolution at 300. Compression is none. And I will again choose the external editor of Adobe Photoshop. Click OK. And I am going to save this as print TIFF and Adobe RGB 8-bit. And that way I just know in general what I'm doing with this, and I'll click create. So I've got these two presets already done. And you'll notice with these, I'm gonna have stack with original so that they will stack into Lightroom, and I'll see these changes in Lightroom. And by default right here, you'll see it's gonna have this dash edit added to the file name here. That's a good way to kind of stay. Another thing we'll look at is file handling. So file extensions, basically this means lowercase here. Compatibility, JPEG preview, these are the starting here. For DNGs here, embed original raw photo. If you do this, it's going to make it bigger, but it's like you can go back to the very beginning, the way it was shot in the camera. I think it's a good idea. I don't necessarily believe in archiving the original file straight out of camera in one location and then this stuff in another location. So I kind of put these all together personally. And I kind of keep this all as default here. Interface, if it's your computer, you could customize this. I'm going to leave it the way it is at school, which is the default. Performance, use graphics processor. If you got a high-end one, that's great. Location, this is kind of set up already as far as where the cache goes. By default, probably this is going to be 10, I believe, on the computers at school. You can change it at home if you want. At school, it's going to reset itself anyway. Same with the video size cache. And this use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. This is a complicated thing. We'll talk about this more later. I don't recommend this as a starting point because it'll do every file, and you probably don't need every file to have a smart preview. It says some settings are catalog specific, and you can open those in catalog settings. So let's go to catalog settings, and here you can see we have general, which is showing us basically where it is. And under general, the key thing is the backup. Now we're going to do every time Lightroom exits. That way we always are just backing up the catalog. Doesn't back up the image files, just the catalog. File handling, there's a standard preview size, or you can set it to be whatever you want it to be. Preview quality, I typically go high, and you can have it discard previews, which will keep your catalog files smaller. That's a good idea there. Metadata, if you want it to make changes, you can. I don't automatically detect these faces because it's just one more thing that kind of slows everything down. But there might be reasons to do this. So you can have that there as a possibility. Now, those are pretty much everything. I'm going to hit the X. Now, I'll go back to preferences real quick, and I will say there's a couple new things here. Lightroom Sync. If you have Lightroom and you're using it on a tablet or smartphone, you can do your subscription and you can log in with your Adobe ID and all that good stuff. I don't really go to that in my class, but those are some things you can do. And if you are working over a network, there would be some stuff there. We're not really doing that, so I'm not going to go into that either.